we're having to swap out components and change out
Mm-hmm.
the model because there's something that's cheaper and better that's available. And so I think you do need to an extent, we need to build small and build fast so that we're able to actually get value from something quickly before everything changes.
Mm.
But also we need to be extremely mindful of ensuring that we're vendor agnostic, model agnostic, and that we can swap things in and out.
Welcome to the show, where air takes the floor. Lee and Rich on the mic, ready to explore.
Welcome to the AI Guys podcast, where we make artificial intelligence easy to understand for everyone. I'm your host, Lee Dixon, and as always, I'm joined by the man who is my secret Santa this year. Shh, don't tell him. Rich Swire. How are you doing, man?
I like it.
Yeah,
I like it. Yeah, a little holiday
exactly.
spirit.
Decided to come in with a little bit of a, joke and folly.
It's a little early though. I mean, you could.
Well, when this
fine.
comes out in Christmas of 2026, it'll work out well.
That's
Yeah.
true. Well
We
done.
actually have a guest today. It's been a while since we've had a guest. You've been talking to me nonstop, and I felt like you needed a break from that. So our guest today is the Group AI Enablement Lead at Vista Software Group, where he helps more than 60 software businesses turn AI and data into production use cases, generating real value. He also chairs the Jonas Europe AI Committee, is part of the Jonas AI Acceleration Team inside of Constellation, and previously used machine learning change point analytics to identify and correct over 100 million pounds of misallocated energy settlement in the UK electricity market. Humble flex, Jason Jackson. Welcome to the pod. How you doing, man?
Really good, thank you. Great to be here.
How much of that 100 million
Did you get?
pounds that kind of like fell off the truck?
It was. I
Not
was gonna say it was
not
120
even-
million. He was just like, we'll just round
Not
down.
even a pip.
Yeah.
It's weird how energy settlement works. It's kind of like not even real money, right? Because it
Yeah.
all just kind of sloshes around. But basically, suppliers who were losing a bunch of money that they shouldn't have been got the refunds back. But
Nice.
it's all really well ring fenced. That we had no bonus system based on anything like that.
Lesson
unfortunately.
learned.
Yeah.
Lesson
So I
learned.
keep that secret until someone's like, I wish we could find this money and I would love to pay. It's like, well, you know what I did find.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna dive into a couple topics today. Obviously, you've got a wide gamut of what you obviously know in the AI space and where you've been doing a lot of your own research over the last few years. And the fact that we had a chance to connect at a couple different events over the last year or two and getting to know you, I thought that maybe today we can talk a little bit about what you've seen inside of Constellation, but also a kind of grander scope around AI adoption, why it might be a little bit slower than expected, and then maybe touch a little bit on where those adoption dynamics and the pushback maybe affected some of this. So, Rich and I have obviously dove into this topic a handful of times on the pod, and I would love to just kind of get your take on it, and then we can go from there.
Sounds good. Definitely areas that I'm been thinking about a lot and really passionate about. Obviously, the core of my role is about trying to accelerate AI adoption because there's so much focus on it within CSI. It's recognized. I mean, I think even across the broader software industry and the technology space, everyone recognizes that this is this transformative shift that's going to be bigger than the internet or the industrial revolution.
Yeah.
And yet the actual the results are kind of less transformative and slower. So that there's pockets of really great outcomes and really where people are actually achieving huge ROI and productivity increases. But I think a question on a lot of people's mind is, why is that not being seen more broadly or more consistently, and why are so many businesses actually finding it really difficult to adopt AI into what they're doing and their drive value for their customers with it. So
Yeah.
a
I agree.
couple.
Well, thank you guys for joining us on this episode. Like we've already knocked it out. It's good to go.
Yeah, they killed it. Yeah.
So to me, a couple of the core themes that seem to keep coming up is so governance, risk and friction, technical debt, legacy systems, brownfield, especially within Constellation. Our kind of business model is we buy a lot of really well-established, mature vertical market software businesses that have really deep vertical market expertise and really great relationships with their customers. But they're often, they've been, the first line of code was written 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, which obviously presents a number of challenges. Then there's also challenges around like clarity around ROI and measurement, which is a big deal. And I think a lot of the times people actually underestimate how important uh, legal and infosec is
Mm-hmm.
to adoption and as kind of like almost as gatekeepers, because within Jonas, which is a division within Constellation Software, we've only just in the last sort of 6 months, I think, really modernized and enabled our business units with our new AI usage policy and the AI tool or platform approval process that's come along with that. And if it's going to take a couple hours to fill out a form to request approval for a new tool, a lot of business units aren't even going to do it. They're just going to say,
Mm.
we're all so pressed for time as it is. Um, and it's not like governance is the boogeyman or is the problem. It's their jobs to keep us out of legal trouble and to keep our systems secure. But it's definitely a significant source of friction, and I think we all need to get better at making that a smoother process.
Yeah. Yeah. We've definitely seen, obviously with a lot of clients that we work with that, the kind of the big blockers that you just outlined are always present, and I think the obtuseness of it is the problem,
Mm.
right? Even just not understanding what you don't, it's the known unknowns, but then it's also the unknown unknowns, right? Which is probably what scares most people is like, it is a new, um, it's just a new entity, right? It's not really like software, right? It's very much this kind of, it almost like has one foot on HR and one foot on
Mm.
IT, right? Because you can ask it questions and it can say things, right? That could be a reflection of
Company and
your
policy,
brand,
yeah, and
your
everything.
company. It's not determinative. The undeterministic component of AI is the scary thing, right? But it's also the most powerful thing, right? But then but what's interesting is we've never seen them really compare it to humans, right? There's an unknown, there's a same amount of risk to technically, right, to a human you might hire, especially the larger companies might have thousands of
Mm.
employees, and if there's nothing stopping from a human saying crazy stuff or
Yeah,
being a bad
burning the
actor as
brand.
well.
Yeah.
So, but then then it comes a question of liability, right? Like who bears that liability when it's a computer that does it? And so I think these deeper questions I don't think anybody's even answered these, even at the highest level
Mm.
of the people who are making this stuff, like OpenAI or even some of the very complex discussions that are happening from copyright or you name it, right? These are all that have yet to fall in the laps of like the Supreme Court or something, because at some point, there is, I think, legal at a bigger level is probably a big inhibitor for everything from IP ownership to
Yeah.
liability that is not only reflects to software companies but just reflects to anybody using AI. So I do think it's still very, very, very early. I think one of the things that we've seen is, and and we're early adopters, and obviously being in the tech world like Jason and others, that this is something that's like it's old hat to us, right? Like we've been doing AI for quite some time, but we have to also kind of realize like it's really, really, really early.
Yeah.
And so some of this is just about classic cultural lag. Like it takes years for it to become kind of understood that this is just the way it is, that people kind of become a little bit more cool about how it operates. They're okay with it getting it wrong sometimes. We're okay with like the copyright thing. It's kind of like we have to kind of be moved as a society to just be cool with some of this stuff. And right now it's very friction heavy because it's fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right?
Well, I was gonna
What
say
do,
there's one other thing on that too, is the fact that these processes that typically take a long time, or at least go through this due diligence, with how quickly AI moves and how quickly I think the users of it feel like they're falling behind. Like you can't really accelerate when you're already in that standstill, right? So you start to have maybe even more pushback just because like teams are like, I'm not doing this until I've done XYZ, and the other teams are like, I have to do it now. So you create like an internal resistance, not just because people on one side want to and the others don't, but just because as AI feels like it's going even faster, that puts even more, I think, a risk in the compliance sector of just being like, well, how am I going to approve this today if we're talking about a month from now? Like the game might change. So having a lot of those unknowns is
Mhm.
absolutely a blocker
And
here.
there's nothing they can reference,
Right.
right? I mean, legal and compliance typically references something. There's no like standard out there
Yeah.
that's been issued,
Good
right?
reason,
And
or
there's
good
that.
reason to draft your own, right? Of like, hey, we're going to treat you as a corporation, an entity that exists,
Yeah.
and these are your rules and governance, and then this is who's it falls on, whoever is essentially inking
Yeah.
the check.
Another question I had for Jason. Another question I had for Jason was like, what do you think the impact from adoption perspective, and just when you're thinking about it, especially when you're rolling out AI across so many different companies, and you probably have a more of a high level view across different kind of circumstances, but what's your mindset right now as far as like the false starts and they went down a path and then suddenly, you know, the ground under them changes, right? Like I think there's a lot of companies that have gone that were kind of early adopters, and they started going down the path of building something that looked somewhat like AI. Maybe they were using early models of GPT, or maybe they're using, you know, they were kind of using a tool or even a platform that might have existed, and then suddenly, you know, things shift so rapidly. Right now we're in the world of reasoning models that change,
Yeah.
even how RAG and how some of the deployment architecture is changing so rapidly. Like maybe also it could be that, I mean, I don't know your thoughts on this, but maybe it's not that nobody's doing anything, it's that people are trying things, but then they're kind of like they're getting only so far, and then the goalposts move.
Yeah.
Or another shiny toy, right? Like, oh, look at over here, and then the developers are like, oh, let's go over here and start doing that. I mean, how much of that are you seeing?
I mean, it's so easy to get distracted, especially when you're spending, you know, I've been obsessively, trying to learn as much as I can about AI and experimenting with it since around 2016 when AlphaGo beat
Mm-hmm.
LisaDole, and I had that kind of oh shit moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think because again, it also comes back to those kind of gatekeepers and pressures. You know, with the CFO wants to say, you know, show me the money. The legal team wants to say prove that this is legal. HR wants to say prove that this is ethical. And at the same time, there's this constant pressure from senior management and from, you know, at group level, and you know, we all feel it across the world. I think right now that this feeling that you're falling behind and that you need to accelerate, you need to try things. And I think thankfully within the broader CSI group, we are actually now in that stage where it's more people are trying things and doing things and experimenting. But yeah, the percentage of those experiments that actually end up meeting expectations and driving a lot of value it's increasing over time, but it's lower than I think we want it to be. In I think the best way to manage that is we need to get better, and a lot of our business units have proven how this works really well. So I think we've got some established best practice in how to do this, which is to treat those experiments as experiments in a very scientific way. So
Yeah.
to make sure that you've got a hypothesis that you're trying to prove. We're always working from the business problem or the customer problem or where we think the customer value is going to come from first, never from the technology first. And we're, I mean, also to your point with with technology and the ground moving underneath you, that is happening constantly. I mean, almost every AI project that I've worked on so far, between starting the project and the inception and when we were planning out the architecture and the components and stuff, and then between like halfway or towards the end of the project, we're having to swap out components and change out the model because there's something that's cheaper and better that's available. And so I think you do need to an extent, we need to build small and build fast so that we're able to actually get value from something quickly before everything changes. But also we need to be extremely mindful of ensuring that we're vendor agnostic, model agnostic, and that we can swap things in and out. That's something that I really like about your platform, which there's a bunch of other, I think, ways in which the kind of low code, no code agent platforms like Rhea are a great way to help less technical operational people experiment in that same way. Because R&D teams started experimenting first; they always are. But it's the real challenge in the battle for hearts and minds, I think, is showing that spark and showing that the art of the possible to everyone else, basically.
Yeah.
It's about being able to swap models in and out, run quarterly bake-offs to test to make sure that you're using the best, cheapest model that achieves the quality or accuracy floor, which I always say you should target as good or better than a human. Because to your early point as well, I think humans actually have a worse track record than AI models for being bad actors and maybe even hallucination. Like we seem to hold AI systems to a different
Yeah, we
standard
do.
We do.
than humans, which seems pretty unfair given that
Yeah.
they don't have a lot of our senses.
Yeah. But they're still positive. They always answer positive. Yeah, that's a great idea.
I actually specifically customize my system prompts to be
Did you?
really
It's
critical.
like,
I prefer a
do
Yeah,
not
no
adversarial.
placate
bias.
me.
Like,
Do not placate me. Don't tell me about every idea is great.
Yeah.
So that brings me to another kind of line of questioning, which is kind of similar. But I mean, what do you think about? I mean, are we in the stage or the phase where we're kind of waiting for AI to kind of become the driver of AI? So what I mean by that is,
There's a question
it
and a
feels like
question,
obvious.
Rich. Oh my gosh.
Maybe I should ask AI what the answer
Yeah.
is. But like, I know that we're I think we're at the tail end, and it's not going to end. It's going to continue to grow. But the infrastructure side, I think the infrastructure is kind of settled in. I think the big, the hyperscalers have made big purchases. They've kind of chosen that this is the architecture, this is the stack, and we understand models, inference, and all that's been in play, and we kind of understand a little bit the software stack of AI now with models and then now it feels like we're in the coding AI makes AI kind of phase, and there's this adoption cycle that's going to have to occur where developers are going to have to decide, okay, do I still want to do it the old way or do I go generative code? But also, more importantly, to Jason's point, what I wanted to expand on, which is it does seem like there's a new generation of developers, right, that are coming in that weren't developers before because they weren't coders, but now they're building apps.
Yeah.
They're building very sophisticated applications using prompt engineering. But I would even say that you could even almost argue that somebody who's just building very nice prompts to help automate their work within ChatGPT, for example, could also, in a weird way, kind of be considered a developer because they are building software. It just happens to be human language. So I don't know what your thoughts on, like, where do you see that kind of playing out as we're entering in this new phase of what I would call like the new developer defining development differently, right? This idea that eventually maybe even AI is just going to start doing it itself, that it doesn't really need our help prompting as much as we would think it needs it. But more importantly, like, do we go from one person in a company being the primary kind of vector of development, or is it everybody is now developing at least at a prompt level, and then that kind of gets kind of thrown through this kind of feeding system up to maybe a
Contribute to the
developer or an IT
project through
team?
AI being the cleaning
Yeah,
of it.
because we certainly, when we built out our platform, we kind of leaned more toward that vision heavily, where we saying, I think it's going to be everybody's going to get involved at some level in building this thing, whether it be through human feedback, training, or even prompt engineering. And that code is kind of this, like, it seems like it's going to be sucked into the infrastructure. I don't know what your
Well, it
thoughts on
also
that
used
are.
to be a blocker too, right? I would love to create.
Oh yeah, of
I would
course.
love to create, but I don't know what I'm doing, and
Yeah.
I can't give this to Rich because he's too busy. So we just put it on the back burner and come back to it, and we never do. So I think that's
Everybody had a great app. It's like everybody had a great app idea at 3:00 in the morning, right? I've got this crazy idea for an app. Now I just need $100,000 to build it. But now it's like,
yeah.
So what are your thoughts?
Now you prototype it that weekend and then decide whether or not it's worth putting more time towards it. So
Right.
I fully agree with I'm completely bought into the idea, and I think it's inevitable that we're going to generate a lot more code and a lot more, prompt engineering and orchestration, and even with no code platforms, and there's going to be an increasing expectation uh, on everyone, whether it's product people or operational people, professional services, any part of the business, to have more. Not necessarily that everyone's going to be a traditional developer or a full-time engineer, but to have more, engineering discipline and thinking more like an engineer in that way. I would push back a little bit on the idea that, so I've got a lot of thoughts on AI driven software development
Sure.
lifecycle. It's something that I'm super interested in. It's been kind of what's made me most excited about AI, and I think you're right that to an extent the kind of infrastructure level is kind of settled, and there's some best practices, and we're going to see a little bit of stability for a period. But in terms of how we actually apply and use models, apart from the very narrow, clearly, heavily explored horizontal use cases like chatbots, like RAG systems, those things I think are maybe a little bit more established, and we kind of have ways of working with them. But in terms of agentic systems and agents that use tools, I think there's going to be a lot of evolution, and that's going to continue to change a lot. And also in terms of what the best practices are and how we organize development
Yeah.
houses, around building software, I think that's going to really change. I think the way that we as software businesses work together and the way we organize our people
Mm.
is going to have to really not it's not going to be a step change, but I think there's going to have to be an evolution towards new ways of working that enable us to really achieve these kind of where every person is essentially
Mhm.
doing 10x and then 20x output, because they're all managing these multiple different AI agents that have
Mhm.
different focuses. Like just for
Yeah.
example, in terms of the development space, I keep seeing this quote that it's quite a spicy take, but that if you're still using an IDE in the January 2026, you're a bad developer. And this idea that you have to have your screen split into 4 CLIs,
Right.
and to be honest, I'm actually I'm super bullish on AI, obviously, and I'm really excited about AI for development. That I do it all the time, both at work and also in my spare time. But I'm kind of resistant to that because I like
Hmm.
to look at the files.
Hmm.
I don't actually go in and edit them because I know that I'm slower than, a spec-driven, AI-driven development lifecycle. But it's still, yeah. There's something I don't know, nostalgic about the
It's
IDE.
jarring. Yeah, it hurts. I always say I spent 30 years developing, and I feel like I just wasted 30 years of my life. In a weird way, even because it's
Makes
like
you a little
I learned all
curmudgeon-y a
this.
little, Rich. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, a little
Yeah.
bit. Like, yeah, I feel like I'm being, kicked out of the, yeah. I don't know. I couldn't be happier to be alive at this
Yeah,
moment because I
there's
think it's the
definitely
most
a
magnificent.
torch being passed a little bit in the
Yeah,
tech
it's
space because it's been the same way for so long since the internet.
yeah,
Really, like that was the last really major shift that we felt
yeah, yeah.
as an
That's the
industry.
same. Yeah, that's the same kind of jarring feeling. So when you think about like ecosystems and the existing software and the legacy software, even like SaaS products that exist today, right? Like the Salesforces, like what do you think's going through their mind? HubSpots, maybe more the general. I'll stay away from vertical software because that's such a nuanced. But like, let's just talk about the general software products that we all know. Like, we all know how HubSpot works. It's not magic. We all know how Intercom or Zendesk works. It's not magic. And sure, they put millions of dollars into building all these little cool little features, but we integrate with all these products. And every time I get into those products, I start to wonder, and I'd like your take on this. I start to wonder, like, is this real? Like, is this really what we need to provide support? Are we programmed by these software companies to think all of these features and functionality is like, you must have this, you must have
Yeah,
that
we've
in order to do?
over-engineered a solution.
Like, it's just,
Or,
or did we create a prison of ourselves, and now we're just stuck on this kind of like branded prison of like, this is how it works, because they're all the same, right? Like Zendesk, team support, Intercom, maybe their UI is a little flashy, but they're the core of it, right? The business process
what it
and the
does for your
general kind of
business. Yeah.
the database layer is probably very similar. So then I'm also thinking, like, okay, is this going to survive? Because it is a human first way it was designed, not an AI first. So does this survive? Does it change? Is it a layer? Like, is it just going to have an MCP and then the AI kind of talks to it and we're all going to go on our merry way and it's not a big deal? Or is it a big deal where it's like people just say, you know what, I don't, maybe I reimagine what support looks like. And when I start thinking of it from an AI perspective, maybe Zendesk or these companies are just kind of like, they're not really working well, in that world, because most of the bells and whistles in these products, I got to click on it or a
Yeah.
human has to do it.
Or we've talked
And
about too, you're
so,
taking all that data out anyways and operating on spreadsheets. So like this becomes kind of a ledger, but
yeah,
it's not really one that you're like,
yeah, for some of the ERP systems, perhaps, yeah, like count, but like,
yeah.
yeah. So I don't know, what's your take on that, Jason? Like, where do you see, like, because it's a multi-trillion dollar world of SaaS that's sitting out there. Like, how does that,
Mm.
and it's not going to happen overnight, but how does that transform? Is it going to be a whole new class of software products that are going to come out of the woodwork of this AI gen type world, and it's just kind of slowly dissipate? Or are these guys going to be able to shift from a human first to AI first? I mean, you and I both build these solutions kind of in both. We've built both, right? On both, we've had our feet on both sides. So I'm curious to see
Yeah.
what your take.
So absolutely, there are going to be a whole new class of software products that evolve out of this, and we are going to need to fundamentally rethink how our business processes and our workflows and operations actually function. And another characteristic of these kind of monolithic extremely complex, over-engineered SaaS horizontal SaaS offerings is also that they're extremely uncustomizable, right? Or I mean, they can be, but it's going to cost you an
Yeah.
Mhm.
absolute fortune, and you're going to wait around because um, I've seen some pretty catastrophic examples of this in the UK energy market, where large suppliers have moved to, for example, SAP, and they've been sold this promise that of course this can integrate with your complex, nuanced, highly regulated space, and then it just totally doesn't, and
Mm.
that
Yeah.
the recovery is a years long, extremely painful, costly process. um, in terms of how it's going to play out, and how those businesses are going to change, I'm actually less certain. And this idea that, which it kind of went, it seemed to float for a while, a long time ago, or I don't know, a couple, in AI years, a long time ago, but a couple of years ago, people were talking about this concept that your new operating system will just be AI, and every application and every use case you need will just be coded on the fly, live as and when you need it. And I think Anthropic also put out like an interesting but not very good tech. I mean, it was very impressive, but it wasn't obviously like an actual usable, where they put out an operating system that was just
Mhm.
coded live by Anthropic on the fly. I don't think that's what business, large enterprises at least, want,
Right.
really. Like, maybe for an end consumer, that could be a cool thing if you're like, not too concerned about, potential issues. But when it's mission critical workflows that you're
Yeah.
talking about, a lot of times you do want that to be deterministic, and you maybe want the flexibility of an AI agent to be able to handle the edge cases, but the actual, the core mission critical workflow or process, you want to be more traditional and deterministic. And
Mm.
you talked on one of your previous episodes, I think, about the interesting relationship that's emerging between the big labs like OpenAI, Google, etc., and these large incumbent SaaS providers, where they're actually choosing to integrate with OpenAI and let people use ChatGPT as the kind of,
Mhm.
the intelligence layer almost, or the interaction layer, on top of their product. Um, I think there's going to be significant changes. I think we're also definitely going to have to think about that in kind of vertical market SaaS solutions. Um, but yeah, the
Yeah.
outcome is pretty unclear to me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the dynamics of AI live kind of on a very thin layer.
Mm.
Kind of this human user interface, whether it's ChatGPT using MCPs or whether it's generating kind of the UX dynamically. I could see that being a reasonable thing for somebody to do. But as far as like you're saying, beneath the water, right, the iceberg effect, beneath everything beneath the water that you can't see, is going to be pretty much continue to be a system of record, and it's going to be something that's hardened. It's going to have a lot of workflow, a lot of logic, and that's just because we live in a very human. Even though humans may not necessarily be a huge part of building or using the software, we live in very much a human world where we have things like we talked about
Hmm.
earlier. We have laws, we have compliance, we have deterministic outcomes that are very important. If you're talking about healthcare, energy, and you can't, you don't want entire electrical grids going offline, and you don't want a doctor not to have the lights on in an emergency room, or have the right equipment, or whatever it might be. So there are like literally life and death situations that you don't want to screw around
Mm.
with. That being said, if I like a better UI or a different dashboard reporting interface to my tool, I think that's a very doable thing that AI is going to certainly kind of own. And I always talk about how AI is attacking from the top and bottom, and I do think that's a reality for every software
Got to
company.
protect the
Is that
middle.
the you got to protect the middle. The UX, I think, is gone. I think whether and gone. And what I mean by that is that it'll either be the user and or customer redefining it, um, or it'll just be ChatGPT or any other
Just a layer.
human
Yeah.
user interface, email, SMS, voice, and then the LLM is coming on the other side, right? And I do think the LLMs, to your point, have done a great job of kind of inserting them into the stack, where it's almost now, I think next year it's like, oh yeah, if you don't have an LLM somewhere in your
Mm.
ecosystem, you're toast. And how you use it is really up to you, but ultimately you have to have something. You have to have some sort of model. But I do think the evolution of that will kind of continue to be more fragmented, maybe smaller models. It'll be more specialized models. And of course, innovation will happen. And those guys are going to push that, the big guys that have all the money.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about the squeeze, us in the software world is going to feel kind of, okay, well, we really can't, those are kind of like written as like, almost like it's meant to be, and there's nothing we can really do there. So it's like, how do we protect the middle, and how do we redefine the middle? And I do think that's a very interesting conversation that we should have in the future, because that deserves its own podcast, because I do think it's kind of it's not how we typically think, right? As far as software developers, we always assume that we can control the user interface. But if we start thinking more like building systems and services, an API layer, and really double down on the logic side and the verticalization, or the specific custom things that are very critical to the businesses, then there's an interesting area there we could build a pretty significant moat around, because these guys that are normalizing the UI, or at least allowing it to be custom, and then the LMs really don't play in that world. And I think that's that doesn't bode well for the horizontal guys. I think those guys are gonna get hurt. To Jason's point, very hard to customize. SAP is notorious for promising things and taking years and millions of dollars to do it.
No.
And so, in the vertical world, where there's vertical market software, where there is some protection in the sense of owning the logic, owning the customer base, understanding that world. Now it's just a race to modernization, it seems like, right? It's a race to capturing the middle. And maybe modernization doesn't mean what it used to mean necessarily. It just means
flexibility, I think, now.
Being able to present yourself, or at least allow AI to connect to you.
Yeah.
Whatever that means might be the new term of modernization.
Yeah. Well, go for it, Jason. And then we'll wrap on that.
Because AI can provide such a significantly improved or better UX and so much more personalization, I just think that if you don't do all those things, you're absolutely going to lose customers. If you don't make it easy for your users to integrate their agents, and to bring their own intelligence layer, and use that kind of modern UX, you're not going to be able to hold on to customers.
Yeah. It seems like the revenue opportunity for any software company now is going to be, maintaining the system of record, modernizing your API, creating maybe even an element of a data lake, or some sort of easier use of ETLs into a data lake, and telling your customer, and then also empowering your team to build out AI generated UIs that are low risk, high reward, and then also expanding that to your customers and just charging a toll like everybody else is at the gate. And I think that's the business model of the future. It's like it's no longer, that it's not SaaS is how we imagined it, but it certainly is its distant cousin, right?
Good stuff, man.
Cool.
Jason, thanks for coming on today. We're definitely gonna have to have you back and dive a little bit more into the middle here, and talk when you're ready for it. So
would love to be back.
Oh.
This was a great experience.
Awesome,
Thank
man.
you.
And for everyone listening, thanks again for joining us on this episode. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to stay in touch. Also, check out our Substack for more content, which will be linked to this episode to continue this discussion. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care, everyone.
It takes the flow.